Hello, I'm Justine Roberts. I work for the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility at the Leeds School of Business, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to our panel. This is the third in a three-part series on the workforce and current events, and today's topic is about how the policies and procedures which companies are putting into place in response to current events are impacting diverse populations in the workforce, both now and into the future. We're excited to be joined in this discussion today by three incredible speakers, Sabrina Volpone, Parker McMullen-Bushman, and Tamarah Saif, and they will all introduce themselves to you in just a minute. A couple of quick housekeeping items first. We do suggest using presenter view so you can see who's talking, and you should all be muted throughout the conversation unless you are a speaker. This is a 60-minute session. We do have some prepared questions. If you would like to ask a question, I want to encourage you to put that in the chat. I will either bring it up right away as the conversation allows, or save it to the end and make time for all of the questions in the chat toward the end of the conversation. Before we begin, I would like to recognize that our program today is located on the traditional territories of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. In addition, 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. Let's go in alphabetical order. Parker, Sabrina, and then Tamarah. Thank you.
To say that I wear a few different head wraps, and so one of my roles is that I'm actually leaving. Tomorrow's my last day, but I'm currently the Vice President of Community Engagement, Education, and Inclusion with Butterfly Pavilion. I am leaving that to take a role working with Colorado State University as the Director of Extension for City and County of Denver. So I start that next month. I also am the founder and CEO of Eco Inclusive, which is an organization that works with conservation-based organizations to provide training and resources around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I am the co-founder of Inclusive Journeys, which is an organization that is working to build a modern version of the Green Book, and we liken it to we want to do for inclusivity what Yelp has done for customer service. And so I will drop my information if you're interested in any of those projects into the chat.
All right, I'll go ahead and go. My name is Sabrina Volpone. I am an assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So I work very closely, at least in proximity, to Justine. And my teaching and also my research that I do outside of the classroom focuses, of course, on diversity, but specifically in two different aspects. So diversity management, how organizations structure their policies and procedures to manage diversity in a way that is going to be beneficial for both them as organizations and then also the employees that work for them. But then also on the employee side, I do a lot of things that get at the experiences of marginalized employees, and that looks a lot of ways. So one of my most recent papers is one on the experience of women breastfeeding and some of the stigma that they face in the workplace around topics like that. And then really that wraps up in the idea of identity management. So how do employees manage their identities in a way to avoid stigma, kind of overcome some of the barriers that might be placed with on them, either in society or in their organizations. And so I really try to look at both sides, from the organization and also the employee experience, just to really overall remove barriers for individuals to make their employment experience better across their careers.
All right, so it's my turn. I am Tamarah Saif. I'm the VP of Human Resources at Charlotte's Web. It is a local-based business, and you all might have heard of us through a little girl named Charlotte, and the reason that we started as a company and started creating some amazing hemp-based and CBD products. So in my role at Charlotte's Web, I do head up the HR team, and I've been here for about 1.5 years. One of the things that we've been wanting to do since I joined, we started talking about diversity and inclusion. And, with everything that has happened this year, the George Floyd incident really kicked us off with saying, you know what, we have to make time for this. This has been a rapidly growing business over the past couple of years, from a private company to a public company, and there's a lot that entails in that. But at this point, no excuses, right? So I got involved with our women's group and was the executive sponsor of our women's group. So we'd been doing some things in diversity, trying to get some things off the ground. We've been working with the Adaptive Athletes program. They use our product. We, kind of help them and partner with them in that nonprofit. So we've been doing some things in terms of diversity and inclusion, but it wasn't focused. And now I'm excited to say that we definitely have quite a bit of focus now. And so I'm excited to also have just kicked off as the executive sponsor our diversity, equity, and inclusion team yesterday afternoon. So there's a lot of great work I think that the team will do, and the company will get out there and in the community.
Thank you so much for telling us about your backgrounds. Sabrina, if I could just ask you to start by helping us understand a question that I think people take for granted that they know, but what is diversity? When we talk about DEI, what are we really talking about?
Sure. Well, diversity on its broadest level, of course, is you can define it as difference, but really when we're talking in organizations and society about diversity, I really like to use terms like marginalized or, stigmatized, some of those. That's really what we're getting at. What can we do as organizations to make sure, and like you're saying, in addition to diversity, there is the inclusion piece, there is the equality piece. And so I think diversity, a lot of people, when you say that word, there's certain things that come to mind. I think one of the most common ways we define it in organizations is around EEO laws and EEOC, those kind of are naturally put on us as HR practitioners or as employees because we're mandated to report those things. So we always think of sex, race, everything that's covered by those EEO laws. But what's fascinating when you are a diversity scholar and when you're really thinking about what is diversity, more than sex and race. I just wrote a book chapter on a type of diversity that I think organizations are just now discovering, and that's neurodiversity. The way individuals think and how those differences can really be leveraged positively. It's just such a great message and kind of this new type of diversity. So when you're asked to define diversity, it's can be really hard because if you look in Webster's dictionary, you can just get at those basics of differences, but then to really extrapolate that to what does that mean in organizations, then practically how do organizations actually, really enact that, usually through those EEO practices, and then to take a further step and what are they doing around inclusion and equality around that diversity. It's really hard just to have this like one sentence definition of diversity because it means so much more in organizations and then in society in a broader way. And as I alluded to with that kind of conversation starter about neurodiversity, it's constantly evolving. Maybe not in the definition per se, but how society is reacting to that word. And so, you know, when you say define diversity, it is this interactive thing with how is society responding to it? How is the local news media cycle responding to it? It's just so much more than a definition. So I just want to acknowledge that, besides, you know, just saying it like a one sentence definition that Webster might put out there. It's a little more complicated, right? That's why we're here.
Yeah. So then, Tamarah, in the context of Charlotte's Web, you mentioned that in the past, the company has looked at things like adaptive athletes, women and girls, and more recently has been responding to racial justice issues and particular issues that have come up for diverse populations around COVID. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the ways that those current events have refocused conversations in your department, or maybe affected your priorities within the department.
Absolutely. So we've definitely refocused, and what we realized, and which I kind of said up front here, was we didn't make it a priority. And shame on me, shame on us for not making it a priority, given, you know, yes, the business is growing, but, you know, we kind of like, oh, things are okay. We don't have anyone raising their hand about discrimination or any type of inequality based on diversity issues. So again, you know, kind of it deprioritized. So what we realized in, you know, the last couple of months is that there are actually some things that we could be doing so easily and so simply to help diversity initiatives. And a couple of things that we started doing from an HR perspective, which we want to bring more diverse people into Colorado. We want to bring more diverse people into our organization in general, but we started talking about, well, why don't we have a large Black population in Colorado? I mean, we went right to that, you know, that population. And so there are a couple of things that we talked about. From an HR perspective, we understand that Black women in particular get paid pennies on the dollar to our counterpart white males. We know that women in general get paid pennies on the dollar as well, but there's even more disparity for Black women. So what we want to do, and this is going to be a law in Colorado next year anyway, is put salary ranges on our job descriptions. And when we post jobs out to any site on our website, to any job board, we're going to have the salary ranges as well. And we're going to stop asking the question, well, how much do you make? Or how much are you looking to make? We're going to stop asking that question, because we recognize that we're basically pigeonholing people. And that's something that was immediate. Like, you know what, we can stop this immediately, and we can start posting those ranges immediately before we are legally required to do it. And our leadership team was completely on board with that. So that was one thing. The other thing was that we could do immediately is that we could actually make sure that we are trying to get more diverse candidates. And our focus right now is Black candidates, given the BLM movement and the spotlight on that now. How can we actually get more Black candidates in our candidate pool? And we need to start going and to diverse job boards. So job boards that do target the Black population. So we are now doing that. It's a really simple thing. We want to find the best candidates, and there are some stellar Black candidates out there. We just need to be able to try to get them in and attract them to Colorado as well. So we're also talking about how can we, if we don't have the right skill set in the state of Colorado, how can we get more people in Colorado as well? So our next step is really trying to go out and solidify some relationships with different programs and potentially historically Black colleges, so that we can actually have partnerships so that we have a pool of people that we can go to, and we can start talking to them about our company, about Colorado, so that when we are looking for candidates for any of our roles, we can go tap into that pool. People already know who we are, but it is about getting our name out there. We also understand that in the dietary supplement industry, in the natural products industry, that industry is not a very diverse industry either. So it is about getting our name out there and just working with other organizations, forming some partnerships so that we can get the word out about what we're doing. So those are the most immediate actions. The other thing that I will mention really quickly is that we've committed to mentor startup Black-owned CBD companies and hemp growers. I think most people now kind of understand that, you know, and I'm going to be quite frank in this discussion, so hopefully no one minds this, but Black men are incarcerated for marijuana exponentially more than, I mean, it's a non-violent crime. And here we are, most, you know, now with legalized marijuana and CBD. Now it's, of course, CBD is different from marijuana. We have that distinction now, but there are not a lot of Black-owned CBD companies, but we're committed, Charlotte's Web is committed to mentoring Black-owned CBD companies. So we are in the process of developing a mentor program now, and we're hoping to open applications by the end of the year so that we can start a full-fledged program starting beginning of 2021.
That's really, really cool. What a way to kind of turn the problem inside out and develop the pipeline. Parker, obviously you're in a very different industry than Tamarah, so I'm curious what kinds of things you guys have been doing, and also if you could talk a little bit about the connections between policies or that are designed to support employees through COVID versus Black Lives Matter related issues. Are they one and the same? Are they connected? And how do you address both?
Okay, yeah. So, you know, at a Butterfly Pavilion, as we have been, you know, this is an interesting time, right? I think everybody understands that, and we're an organization that is really been committed in the last few years to being inclusive, to serving our community and new communities as well. And in the middle of COVID, that can seem like a very hard thing to do. And we are all in kind of a survival mode. Like, we're an organization that depends on people coming through our doors, right? And people paying an entry fee to help support all the work that we do. And so as things, as we shut down during the time when everyone was staying at home, and as we reopen, there was a lot that we needed to do to make sure that we were supporting our staff and thinking about it in a real kind of deep way, the policies that we were setting, and making sure that these weren't going to be policies that had long-term negative effects on people. Immediately after closure, we had a discussion about, you know, what do we do to support our staff? If we are closed, we do not have money coming through the door, and we have a little bit of a nest egg, but that is only going to float us for so long, and it would be really easy to let go of a lot of our staff that will not be working. People who are in the gift shop, right? People who are at guest services. How long do we support those employees? But we decided, that we were going to support all of our staff, and we knew that people who are on the front lines are often very much the closest ones. Like if you miss a paycheck, if you don't have money, that could mean something very disastrous. And so we decided to do everyone from frontline on up to executives at 25% furlough. And so that really allowed us to support people through that 3 months, really, that we were closed. And it was a really big, I think, deal to support people. Not only that, we started to ask, what did our community members need from us during this time, and started to think about the education that we provided. There's a big, as everybody went home, right, we started to see what was really interesting, is interesting about COVID is there is nowhere to hide the inequities, right? We are seeing that with everyone switch to this new understanding of what it means to be without a job, with everyone seeing what it means to be a frontline person who can't afford to work from home, right? All of these things really brought to light inequities that have always been there, but people could choose not to see them. And when we thought about the education and how do we really reach our community, we knew that we needed to ask the community what they needed, and started, doing listening sessions and really reaching out to parents and teachers, and really figuring out how we could offer things to families in a way that was really accessible to them in lots of different formats. And when we came back to be open, right, we had to look at our policies on how can we protect the safety of the population and as well as our staff, which is also, is a bit of an equity thing. And how do we look at who can work from home, right? And who is needing to be on the front lines, and how do we make that equitable for folks? And so that was another level. So we're dealing with all of that, and then we have protests that then show up, right? And there's this totally new facet, because now that people have had the opportunity to, or not opportunity, but have been forced to stay at home, people now have time. And now that these inequities are laid bare, right, people have time to go out and protest and speak out against them, which has kind of stoked the fires of this bigger movement, right? And we're finding ourselves, well, how do we look at that? And how does that tie in to what we're already doing, facing and trying to revamp all of our policies and how we handle things during COVID, but also not lose the importance and vitality of the moment, and how we are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, not just with a statement, right, but with actions that we can bring forth as our organization, as community leaders, and really in my realm, which is environmental education and museum and zoos, how do we bring forth those actions, which are really different things?
Yeah. So Sabrina, Parker's talking about how does a business work to create equity in outcomes across diverse populations. I wonder if you can kind of pick up on that and talk about, from just across the range of populations that are in the workforce, what are some of the things that we, as people in business, what are some of the things we can be paying attention to so that the kind of crisis responses play out over the long term in ways that lead toward greater equity?
So the first part of your question, I think what we really need to pay attention to is how we are managing diversity. And a very common way to approach diversity is through the business case. It's like, oh, if we have more diverse employees, we're going to have more creative and innovative ideas. Then we're going to have more products to offer, and then that's going to increase our bottom line. Like there's such a focus in so many ways, both from the research side and in organizations and how they manage diversity, to focus on this business case and the bottom line outcomes. And because if you can explain things and have examples with dollar signs attached to them, executives pay attention, leaders pay attention. Like that's very easy to present some slides on in any executive meeting or any HR meeting. What we've heard a lot thus far, and especially in throughout Parker's latest comment, is the role that kind of the moral case for diversity also plays in this. And another way that I explain it in more businessy terms is to think about like the cultures and climates we have within our organizations. Yes, we have either strong or kind of maybe in some organizations weaker climates for diversity. What also you have to consider and all for any of this to work is also inclusion, but also this ethics component, which kind of relates back to this like moral case for diversity. And if you're not thinking about like these people as people, that are working in your organizations, and also more than just dollar signs for how you're conducting your business, it's going to fall apart really quickly. And it's going to fall apart even faster in pandemics and when everything's falling apart anyway. And that kind of gets to the second part of, so we have to think about diversity differently, right? Yes, we can focus on the business case, but it's more than that. It's more than the business case. It's the moral case. We have to bring ethics into it. Just view people. As simple as that sounds, not a lot of our organizations are set up to do that. And so for the second part of, oh, sorry, Parker, go ahead. Oh, were you trying to get in?
Yeah, just because I'm so interested in this conversation of the business case, right? And I think you're exactly right. Organizations have been balancing that and are not always looking at it from the treating people as people case, but that data, like it's often hard to quantify, and people are they are not very swayed by large data trends, right? They see that, okay, we have equality and opportunity, and that's enough, right? Anybody can apply for our job, anyone can do it, and that's the only thing that we need to do. But when they're looking at the other end, looking at their staffing, looking at their organization, they see that it's not there, but they're like, well, what do we do about that, right? There's nothing we can do about that. Anyone can apply, which is why what some of the things were said earlier are so important. How do we start to expand that, right? And it also makes me think of the project I'm working on with Inclusive Journeys, to provide data for organizations, right? Because if someone goes to a place and now there's suddenly a rating that people are saying whether or not they felt safe at the place that they worked, or the place that they visited, or the restaurant that they were in, or they felt celebrated, or they felt like, that place was created to include them, then suddenly we do have strong data, right? Not just the demographics, but like data that shows, look, 50% of people who come to this space don't feel welcome. It's majority women, and they're saying that it's this and this and this that make them feel that way. Now we have actionable steps as an organization, right, to make those changes.
And speaking to the data point, a lot of ways that organizations get at that are 2 or 3 items in a yearly engagement survey. Someone with a background in measurement and kind of this more, kind of this dorky little nerdy scholarly approach to this, that's not how you measure things. It's not enough to have good reliability, good validity. I'm not going to go down, that nerd train, but 2 or 3 items once a year just isn't telling you that story, the one that Parker's really getting at. And so really changing this kind of daily experience that we have, looking at people as people, but then getting new kinds of data that is more reliable, more valid, and that can also, link to that business case that we're traditionally used to kind of telling the story around diversity in those convincing ways to our leadership, but also kind of getting at other levels. And I'll kind of just state this in another way, but it is going directly off the 3rd or 4th sentence that Parker said in her initial response was, we are in a situation where we're kind of reinventing the wheel with COVID, kind of, how do we work at home virtually? How, there's this pandemic. We are reinventing so many policies and procedures around leave. How much leave can our employees take? What does sick leave look like when COVID lasts weeks, if not months, things like that. So when we're reinventing things, we have this opportunity to make sure that we're doing it in the right way that is more expansive, measuring things, am I included here? Do I belong here? Was the space set up? Did I feel psychologically safe, either while I worked there or while I shopped there? This is the time we are being given an opportunity, which, I don't usually use a lot of words with positive connotations around a pandemic and some of these big news topics lately. But if this is an opportunity for us to kind of reinvent the wheel and do things with more ethics, more humanity, more diversity in mind, let's take that opportunity.
So Sabrina, that really echoes something you said to me earlier in the week, which I wrote down, which was that COVID has exposed some of the ways that we leave the lived experience out of what it means to be a worker, which I thought was really a powerful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Tamarah, I'd like to ask you, the kinds of policies that you were talking about earlier are really deep, and they're lasting. They're really restructure some of your relationships to the ways in which you're doing business. In one case, hiring, for example. A lot of organizations' response to crisis is a little bit more immediate, right? To address the first problem in front of them. And I think about anti-bias training in the context of racial justice. And I'm wondering about how you think about that at Charlotte's Web. Has that been a piece of the Charlotte's Web response or not? And if so, where does that kind of thing fit in for you in the big picture?
Okay, so, yes, most companies' immediate response is we have to put out a statement, we have to say something. And what's happened over the past couple of months, especially after the first wave of protest, a lot of companies actually got in trouble with their statements because they seemed very inauthentic. And so Charlotte's Web, being a company that was built, very mission-based company, very community-focused company, we didn't want to react the way that other companies were reacting, so we actually took some time. Now, we took some hits from our employees, quite frankly, because they wanted us to say something. And I told the people that were coming to me, and I said, look, guys, we have to be thoughtful with how we react. We can't just put out a statement. We can't just have some type of diversity training and call it good and think that everything is going to be okay and we can go back to business as usual. Well, as with COVID and with the protest, I mean, we're not going to go back to business as usual. If a company goes back to business as usual, they're probably going to be out of business at some point, because there's issues that they have to address. And so it took us about a week to get out a statement and get out something that we felt really good about in terms of what we could do to address the immediate issues at hand, which are Black lives. So we took the time to really to understand that, what we wanted to do, and put some action in place, or potential action in place, that would be sustainable, that we could continue to build upon over the next 6 months, year, 18 months, and so on and so forth. So we took our time. Now, one thing that we did, because we did have, and we have a lot of passionate people that work at this company. We had a lot of people that they raised their hands. We want to do something. We will lead whatever it is that we need to lead, but we want to do something. We want to let people know that, you know, we in Charlotte's Web don't stand for what's happening out here in the world. So, or particularly in the US. So we did have someone come in to help lead a discussion with the entire organization. It was kind of about a week later, because again, we were trying to be thoughtful about our approach and what we wanted to do. So we did have someone come in to help lead a discussion about diversity, lead a discussion about the immediate issues that we're having in the US, specifically around Black lives. And a lot of people, is quite interesting, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with saying the word Black and lives. And I mean, that is the immediate issue that we're facing right now. Yes, there are plenty of other diversity issues and things that we have been combating for a while, but this is the immediate issue. And so she came in and basically she made some people uncomfortable. And my stance right now, after George Floyd and curling up over a weekend inconsolable because I couldn't believe what was happening in this country, it just hit. I mean, obviously I knew, but it just hit really hard. And I decided that I will be happy to make people uncomfortable if I can help open their eyes to something, to see something differently. So, so we did have that discussion. It was a very open, frank discussion with this diversity consultant, and you know, she might have made quite a few people uncomfortable, but the feedback that we got back in terms of her being there and leading this discussion and just putting some things out there in terms of, you know, what diversity, you know, just kind of from a diversity's perspective, from okay, right now in this country, the diversity issue is Black lives. So we can say Black and brown people, we can say, you know, we can kind of define diversity lots of different ways, but right now this is the immediate focus, and we need to get this resolved because it's an issue that hasn't been resolved for hundreds of years. So in that, we kind of kicked off Slack channels now, anti-racism Slack channel. We have a community Slack channel, and we have I don't remember how many people are in our anti-racism Slack channel. I was in it this morning. We've started a book club now. So people have been sharing resources about racism in America. You know, what's a good book? What's a good movie? What's a good documentary? You know, how can people get more access to the history of what's happened in this country? And so now we have a book club that literally just started this week through members of this anti-racism Slack channel. So we wanted to do more than just a training. So bias training, sure, it could be great, but when people leave the room from a training, they forget. um, they forget the training. They're pumped up in training, but 2 hours later, when they're in the thick of things and trying to get something to work in the business and solving issues in the business and going about their day to day, people forget. And so it's really about putting in place some sustainable actions that everyone in the organization can participate in. And that's what we're trying to do.
I'm interested in the book group because that's actually something that we're doing as well at Caesar. We started a book group, and I read an article in the Atlantic this weekend about how consciousness raising is only one step. And that leads to a question that's actually was just sent to me. Parker, I know you've done this kind of training. And so I'm curious, I'm going to throw you this question. And I apologize, it's a little hard for me to read on my screen. But Jenna from Namaste Solar asks, she's working with her company to take action. And one of her goals is to use this particular moment of racial awareness to build structure and accountability to help maintain momentum once this moment has passed. So any advice on how to do that?
Yeah, I think, you know, first as an organization, you have to decide where you're willing to go, right? Because equity is a lot, right? And sometimes when people are talking about equity, which is addressing historical wrongs and really looking, it's not just equality, but it's providing people what they need to fully participate and be a part of your group. Sometimes when people say equity, they really mean diversity. Like, we just want to have some different looking people in our group. Or they mean inclusivity. We'll let people in our group and, you know, we'll let them talk, but they don't really mean that they're going to provide resources for people if they are lacking, you know, certain resources. And so that, like, you have to decide what is it that we're really talking about as a company, because that's how you will set what you're going to be held accountable for, right? So you have to say, you know, what is it we want? We're talking about diversity, then that's kind of the lowest branch, and we want to bring some diversity in. We're going to define that diversity, right? Maybe it's bringing in people of color, maybe it's bringing in specifically people who are Black, maybe it's you know, I had someone who was like, in one training that I did, and it's like, if we're talking about diversity, we should include people from you know, who live in rural areas. And I said, that's great, right? That is a type of diversity because you're in here, but you are here in a metropolitan area. But is that going to get you what you need? Like, do you want rural perspectives? Because if that's what you feel like you are lacking, then by all means. But if you are, you know, if you're looking for perspectives from people of different cultures, bringing in rural diversity, even though it's diversity and will let you check it off your box, we're diverse, right? Is not maybe going to move your organization forward. So not being afraid to name the diversity that you're talking about, right? And to put actual numbers to it, right? We want to be representative of the population of the Denver metro area, right? And what are those percentages? And we're just going to work toward it, right? And so that's one part. Then inclusivity is everyone's voice really being heard? So when you bring people into spaces, sometimes we invite people into our organizations and we think, okay, we are going to hire people of color and they're going to be just like us, and when they speak they're going to hold all of the same views and it's going to be harmonious. And then, you know, when you really get diverse groups into your organization, it shakes things up, right? And that is actually a part of the beauty of diversity, because diverse teams, right, are more productive. And the reason being is that when you are in a homogenous team, you get a lot of rubber stamping. You know that people kind of think like you use less words to describe things, to explain things. And when you're in a diverse team, you don't have that guarantee. And people actually take longer to think about projects, and like, I need to look at it from all sides because I might be called to defend what it is that I'm presenting, because not everyone has the same lived experience as me, and it actually makes better products in the end. But it's not going to make a better product if you don't allow those diverse voices to speak up. And so if once people get into your company, if they aren't doing the group think because they come from a different background, and you are squashing them down as saying, you know, they're not on board, they don't know our vision, and then in just a little while they're out the door again because they weren't the right cultural fit, right? Then you have an issue. So you have to set goals for inclusion, right? Whose voices are being heard in our meetings? Are we hearing everyone top down? Are we bringing in differing opinions and valuing them at the same level as other people in our organization? And then for equity, you know, if you want to be accountable to equity, you have to decide, how far are we going to go, right? Is that something like listing job, salaries, so that we are not pigeonholing people into a certain salary range when they come to us, right? That is one way to increase equity. There's an organization that I know in Denver that works with youth from marginalized backgrounds, and they want to get youth into the outdoors, and they have an equity officer that it's their job to handle anything that would impede that goal for youth. So getting youth into the outdoors and involved in their program. So if a person says, a kid says, you know, the lights are out at my house this week and I can't wash my clothes and it makes me feel embarrassed, so I'm just not going to come to group this week, right? This equity officer will actually work with families to get their lights turned back on, right? Whether that's monetary resources or getting them in touch with other resources that are available in the community. So they take it all the way to this level, like, yes, your lights are absolutely our business because it's impeding our ability to do our program mission, right? And so you have to decide where on that scale you're going to be, right? In kind of doing equity, and then how do you hold yourself accountable for that? And one way that you can also think about being held accountable for the work that you do is by allowing your community and the people that you work with to hold you accountable and not shying away from that. So if you put it out there in your statement that this is the work that we are going to do and we are committed to it, and then someone in your community says, hey, I thought you were committed to doing this, but like, I look at your leadership and they're all a monolith, then you don't shy away from that, right? You say, okay, my community is holding us accountable and we are working toward that and we're going to do that, right? And so you have to be committed and willing for that bigger accountability.
And something both of these ladies, if I can just jump in for 2 sentences, just a theme I picked up on, really speaking to making people uncomfortable. That's just going to be a natural part of some of these processes that we're going through right now and that we're working through. But I love how even as we were talking, and I'm talking about myself specifically, but talked about people being uncomfortable with the backdrop of kind of the majority in mind. I just kind of wanted to state there's been a lot of people that have been uncomfortable in organizations for a really long time. And to speak to Parker's point, not having a voice at the table, or if they are at the table, just not being heard. So, you know, just kind of collapsing these two ideas of where we are with COVID and this pandemic, and also how we can move forward with some of our diversity, inclusion, and equality initiatives. It's just, you know, even talking about making people uncomfortable, it's like, well, what about the people that have been uncomfortable for a really long time, you know? I don't know, I just kind of wanted to put some of those thoughts together because I thought it was interesting even how we are talking about that. And since we're at this place where we are inventing, or, you know, kind of reshaping new policies and procedures, let's do it in a way that isn't how the narrative's shaped anymore. There'll always be an element to that, majority, minority, things like that, but we're at a place where we can make some real changes here. Like, you know, let's try to make some changes to that. Just an idea, just something I'm putting out there.
I really appreciate you saying that. And one of the other groups of the workforce that I wanted to make sure we spent just a minute or two on is parents. You know, when I think about the different ways that we slice up the workforce, we know that in these days when school is a question and daycare is unavailable, a lot of the burden falls on women, and women who are working from home or have the ability to be home with their kids tend to take on more of the day-to-day management of the household than their male spouse in a heterosexual relationship. So I'm curious, you know, how do we need to be thinking about parents in general, women in particular, in this moment, so that as a group, we're not pushing people out of the workforce, so that we're making space for them, so that when things do evolve to the next step, whatever that looks like, the future of work, that those people are interested in coming back and still engaged. Tamarah, I see you nodding. Why don't you start?
Parker had her hand up, I think.
Yep. Parker, go ahead. I can definitely jump in, but
She just looked like really excited.
Great.
Yeah, you know, and I'll try and be quick, but like today we are seeing that things that have never been on the table before are on the table now as we are dealing with our response to COVID. And it's actually brought up some great things in that room. Before, you know, you wouldn't hire someone if they could only work from home, right? For a lot of positions, like that seemed like a deal breaker before. And we are seeing now that there's so much work that could be done from home. And so how do we provide those opportunities for people that need to stay home even as things are opening back up, and care for their kids, because maybe they're high risk, maybe they're not high risk, maybe they know people in their family who are high risk and they want to protect them. And how do we provide the opportunities and the space, right? There's a lot of hours in a week and they don't all have to happen between a certain time. Like, can we have people have phone call and meeting hours, but then have other hours during the day where they can be dealing with their kids and homework and things, and then finish up things in the evening or very early morning, right? We are seeing that we can be flexible in these spaces, and I think it's opening up a wider range of opportunity, not just for able-bodied folks who have to stay home, but for people with disabilities. Like, we need to not go back to what we were before. We've seen what we can do as a society, right? If we said feed all the kids lunch, whether or not they have free or reduced lunch every day for 3 months, right? We can do that. No, we can't have that. That's a part of our budget that it's going to go over. We did it, right? Give every kid a laptop or an iPad so they can, we can't know our budget. So we did it, right? So there are so many things that we can do, and we need to be open.
yeah, so I definitely completely agree with with what Parker was saying there, and just, you know, from a company perspective, my company employ over half of our workforce is actually hourly workers that work in manufacturing, in our manufacturing and shipping location. So it's a little different for us as well, because we had an essential workforce that worked the entire time, and we had plenty of women working for us, and we recognized that we needed to do something for people because they needed to figure out what they were going to do with their kids. So we implemented a policy pretty much right away that gave people 2 days. You have 48 hours, essentially, you know, two work days to figure out what you can do with your kids now that they're not going to be in school. And if there were any issues that they were coming up with, they came to us and we could talk it through and figure out what we could do for them to basically not penalize them. We didn't want people to, and women, again, in particular, we didn't want them to be penalized because they were single mothers and they had to figure out what they were going to do with their kids, also recognizing that these are folks that need to work. And they're literally, you know, they're working from paycheck to paycheck. They tell us this, we know this. And so that's something that we kept in mind as this crisis of COVID hit, was that, yeah, we can send our, you know, kind of headquarters staff, we can send them home to work remotely, but we're an essential business, we have essential employees, and we need them to keep the business running so that we all have jobs. So how can we help accommodate them and not penalize them in the process, and not penalize in particular our women on staff that are working hourly? And so, yeah, we did come up with new policies to help out.
Just a few ideas that might just be like the simplest thing in the world to implement. What about like the Zoom calls, right? What are the norms around that? You know, I am shocked, or maybe that's why some of you have your cameras off. Maybe you have kids like sitting in your lap. Like, why is, I understand there has to be a level of professionalism, and there's some meetings like a workshop you're doing or a panel that, you know, have the kids taken care of for an hour is definitely preferred. But there are so many Zoom calls and meetings that we're having nowadays that, you know, I shouldn't have to have a mini heart attack if my daughter comes in and just gives me a hug real quick, right? It's just, what are the norms? You know, I feel like we're adapting a lot of the norms that are in the workplace, like keep that separate. Like, you know, I don't want them to think of me as a mother. I want them to think of me as a professional, and things like that. That even translates to how we're doing Zoom calls and our meetings in this COVID environment. And I don't think that has to be the case. And a lot of times when we talk about kind of the two work and life merging, it's through an accident. It's like, oh, my child broke in, and, you know, now they're in my Zoom camera and things like that. But I have like distinctions for my daughter who's 7. It's like, you know, and for this one, I'm like, you will stay outside and play for an hour. But 90% of my calls these days, I'm like, you can come in and give me a hug. Or if you need me to open that applesauce, like, just come in, it's okay. And I normally, you can kind of probably even tell by what I'm wearing. I'm very kind of assimilate to the masculine culture in terms of like a white shirt and a black. That's just some of my identity and management around being female in a very masculine space. That's a different panel, a different conversation. But I have really tried to, especially in my early career, have those lines very clear, like work over here, family over here. COVID has put us in a situation where that's impossible. And I've really even, you know, what can organizations do? You know, that's a conversation we've been having, but even us personally, like considering those boundaries and even like the pressures we put on ourselves for upholding those norms that came from pre-COVID days of how can we integrate work and life? Usually we can't. You know, this is an opportunity to play with that a little, have those reflections with ourselves, in addition to the conversations we're having about what can our organizations do, because we can change norms as well, for parents, for women, for our organizations. And like many, you know, like the other wonderful women have said, you know, we're not going to go back to normal. So why not start implementing those norms now, kind of practicing or playing with those a little bit to see what we're comfortable with. And then maybe when we do go back to the office, whenever that is, maybe we bring some of those more, you know, norms that are conducive to working moms or to women or just to employees in general back to the office with us. It's possible.
That is a inspiring and hopeful way for us to end. We are out of time. I know that this conversation could have another hour more. I will send out an email to everybody who participated today. I know that Parker had included some links in the chat. I'll put those in, and anything else that's contributed. I just put a link in the chat to you. That's a feedback survey, and I will put this in the follow-up email as well. But if you have any thoughts on today's panel, please let us know. For us at Caesar, doing these kinds of programs for the community is something that we really enjoy doing, and it's a big part of our mission. So having your thoughts on what we can do, what we did well, what we can do better, it's always useful. So thank you. Thank you to the panelists. We deeply appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty today. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day and stay well.